Welcome everyone. In the previous lecture, we started nitrogen cycle. In other two lectures also, we'll be continuing nitrogen cycle only. Let us try to understand what is nitrogen cycle and what are the steps of the nitrogen cycle. We understood that nitrogen is a macronutrient. Plant requires nitrogen in more concentration, but the amount of nitrogen which is present in the soil is 1%. So the nitrogen which is present in the atmosphere is 78%. Now in the process of nitrogen cycle, the atmospheric nitrogen will come to soil, and from the soil it goes to the atmosphere via plants and animals. So this cyclic movement of nitrogen from atmosphere to the soil, from the soil to the atmosphere through plants and animals is called nitrogen cycle. Let's start a class. Today's topic is nitrogen cycle. Right, children? It is nitrogen cycle, right? Now, what is nitrogen cycle? As I told you that plant needs more nitrogen, but soil is a poor source of nitrogen. Plant needs too much of nitrogen, but coming to soil, soil is a poor source of nitrogen. Soil has only 1% of nitrogen. Soil has 0.1 to 1% nitrogen, whereas atmosphere, right? Atmosphere has how much percent of nitrogen? Atmosphere has 78% of nitrogen. So the atmospheric nitrogen comes into soil. The atmospheric nitrogen comes into soil. So who are doing this? Microorganisms. And from the soil, again the nitrogen goes to the atmosphere. So atmospheric nitrogen, so we'll write here. The cyclic movement of nitrogen from the atmosphere to the soil and from the soil to the atmosphere via plants and animals. Who are circulating this? Plants are circulating it and animals are circulating it. The cyclic movement of nitrogens from atmosphere to the soil and from soil to the atmosphere via plants and animals is called as nitrogen cycle. Did you understand what is nitrogen cycle, right? Nitrogen, why is it required by the plant in large concentrations? Because it's a macronutrient. So nitrogen is a macronutrient. Correct, children? It is a macronutrient. Now in ecosystem chapter, one topic will come which is called nitrogen cycles or nutrient cycles we tell. So we use a word called nutrient cycles. Now nutrient cycles can also be called as biogeochemical cycles. Nutrient cycles can also be called as biogeochemical cycle. Why are you calling it as biogeochemical cycle? Plants and animals are biological organisms. Atmosphere and soil includes the geographical area. So any element, any nutrient, if it is circulating from biological organism to a geological scale, then that is called as biogeochemical cycles. What is circulating is nutrient circulating. So that is why biogeochemical cycle is also called as nutrient cycle. In that we are talking about nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen, in which form it is present in the atmosphere? It is present in the gaseous form. Means nitrogen comes under an example of gaseous cycle. So nitrogen cycle is example of which cycle? Because it is present in the form of inert gas, N2 gas, we call nitrogen cycle is an example of gaseous cycle. Now for gaseous cycle, who is a reservoir? The reservoir of nitrogen, you already know that 78% of nitrogen is present in the atmosphere. Soil contains only 1%. Then who will be the reservoir? Atmosphere will be the reservoir. For gaseous cycles, the reservoir is the atmosphere. The reservoir of nitrogen is atmosphere. The reservoir of gaseous cycle is atmosphere. Why? Because nitrogen is present in the gaseous state. Understood, children? Nitrogen cycle has 5 main steps. What are the 5 main steps of nitrogen cycle? Nitrogen cycle proceeds in 5 steps. Now let us list down what are the 5 steps of nitrogen cycle. The first and foremost step is called nitrogen fixation. The first and foremost step of nitrogen cycle is called nitrogen fixation. See, the nitrogen which is present in the atmosphere is fixed in the form of ammonia, nitrite, nitrate. That is called nitrogen fixation. That is the first step. Now when that nitrogen gets fixed in the soil, plants start taking that nitrogen in the form of nitrates and nitrates. What is that called? Nitrogen utilization. What is the second step called? The second step is called nitrogen assimilation. Nitrogen assimilation means using that nitrogen, storing that nitrogen is called nitrogen assimilation. Plant will use that soil nitrogen, it will build up its biomass. Plant is eaten by herbivorous animal will build its biomass. At one point of time, plant will die, animal will die. Then the complex body material of plant and animal gets broken into simpler particles. That process is called ammonification. So the third step is called ammonification. So ammonification comes under decomposition, where the complex body materials are broken into simpler forms and ammonia will be released out into the soil, right? That's called ammonification. The fourth step, conversion of ammonia to nitrite, nitrite to nitrate, is called nitrification. The fourth step is nitrification. And the last step, now nitrogen fixation, watch carefully. Nitrogen fixation, atmospheric nitrogen is fixed into soil. So the arrow is down. Nitrogen assimilation, so from the soil plant is using it. Plant is also there on the land, arrow mark down again. Ammonification, it is decomposition happening in the soil again, arrow mark down again. Nitrification, conversion of ammonia to nitrite and nitrate. Since ammonia is toxic, ammonia, urea, uric acid are excreted materials. They are toxic forms. So that is why plant takes ammonia, but it converts them into nitrite and nitrate. That step is called nitrification. All these are happening in the soil, in the plant, in the animal, right? So now if all the nitrogen comes and accumulates here itself, then this becomes deficit. Atmosphere becomes deficit. If you want to continue it as a cycle, there should be at least one arrow moving from the soil to atmosphere. Then only it will be a cyclic movement. The last step is called denitrification, where soil nitrogen goes to atmosphere. Means either ammonia or nitrate gets converted to nitrogen gas. That is called denitrification. That is the last step, children. What is the last step? Denitrification. All these 5 steps in the previous lecture. We discussed it in the form of a flow chart. So we just discussing the introduction to nitrogen cycle, then we will get into the steps of the nitrogen cycle. What did we write on the board? We were talking about nitrogen cycle and we are telling that plant needs nitrogen in more concentration, but soil is a poor source of nitrogen. How much nitrogen is there in the soil? Only 1% nitrogen is there in the soil. How much nitrogen is there in the atmosphere then? 78% by volume it is there, right? So then nitrogen, it is required more, means it is a macronutrient. And the nitrogen cycle is called as a nutrient cycle. Since the nutrient cycle is circulating from atmosphere to a living organism, from living organism to atmosphere again, it's called biogeochemical cycle. And nitrogen, since it's a gas, it comes under gaseous cycle. And for gaseous cycles, who is a reservoir? You can make out 78% is there in the atmosphere. So atmosphere is a reservoir for gaseous cycle. And this nitrogen cycle proceeds in 5 steps. First one is nitrogen fixation. Second one is nitrogen assimilation, storage. Third one is ammonification. Fourth one is nitrification. Last one is denitrification. Take a screenshot, then we will talk about the first step in today's class, that is nitrogen fixation. Right, children? Now let's talk about the first step in the nitrogen cycle. What's the first step? Nitrogen fixation. Any doubts or any interaction, post it in the comment box. We'll start now with the first step of nitrogen cycle, that is called nitrogen fixation. Step 1. What is it called? Nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation. What do you mean by nitrogen fixation? Atmosphere contains inert nitrogenous gas, molecular nitrogen, we call it as N2, that getting reduced to ammonia, inorganic form, nitrogenous salts, is called as nitrogen fixation. What is nitrogen fixation? It is nothing but the conversion of molecular nitrogen into ammonia. Nitrogen fixation is nothing but the conversion of molecular nitrogen to ammonia. Molecular nitrogen is an inert form. It is an inert gas, whereas this ammonia, it is an inorganic salt. It is the usable form. Plant can use it, and this is unusable form. Plant cannot use this nitrogen. So that is why we are taking that nitrogen and converting it to ammonia. If you recollect the nitrogen cycle, in the nitrogen cycle we have seen there are 3 types of nitrogen fixation. One is called as electrical nitrogen fixation, industrial nitrogen fixation, biological nitrogen fixation. Do you remember how many types of nitrogen fixations are there? 3 steps of nitrogen fixations are there. 3 types of nitrogen fixations are there. Children, what is the first type? We call it as biological nitrogen fixation. And what is the second step? Biological nitrogen fixation means where microorganisms are involved, right? Microorganisms are involved here. And coming to the second type is called as industrial nitrogen fixation. The second one is industrial nitrogen fixation. In industrial nitrogen fixation, we call it as Haber-Bosch process. It is an industrial technique to prepare urea. And the third one is called electrical nitrogen fixation. What's the third type? It is called electrical nitrogen fixation. So these are 3 types of nitrogen fixation. Electrical nitrogen fixation accounts for 10% of fixation. Electrical nitrogen fixation accounts for 10%. Industrial nitrogen fixation accounts for 20%. Biological nitrogen fixation, the remaining 70% of the total nitrogen fixation. Biological nitrogen fixation accounts for 70% of the total nitrogen fixation. Industrial accounts for 20%. Electrical accounts for 10%. See, in industrial, we are using instruments. In electrical, we are using electric discharges, thunders, storms, UV radiations. Microorganisms are not involved. Living organisms are not involved. So, 2 and 3 together are called as abiological nitrogen fixation. If this is called biological nitrogen fixation, then industrial and electrical, we can call them as abiological nitrogen fixation. Let us talk one by one. We'll start with electrical nitrogen fixation first. It is small. We'll finish off 3, 2, then we'll come to 1. The first one is electrical nitrogen fixation. Right, children? Electrical nitrogen fixation is also called physical nitrogen fixation. It is also called physical nitrogen fixation. Since microorganisms are not involved, we can also call it as abiological nitrogen fixation. We can also call it as abiological nitrogen fixation. All these are the names, and we already told electrical nitrogen fixation accounts for 10% of the total nitrogen fixation. Now, electric discharges, thunderstorms, atmospheric pollutants, all these UV radiations, what they will do? Let us write on. So, we get from electric discharges, we get the charge, or thunderstorms, or atmospheric pollutants. Like UV rays comes under atmospheric pollutants only. All these are responsible for oxidation of the nitrogen gas. N2 combines with O2 is oxidation. So what they will do, Amma? They will convert, they will oxidize N2 with O2. So we have to write lightening, and we can write UV rays. So this process is oxidation, and for oxidation we need energy. The energy is lightning energy and UV rays energy. What they will do? When N2 combines with O, you will get 2 molecules of NO. We get 2 molecules of NO. What is NO? Nitric oxide. NO is called nitric oxide. Amma, the nitric oxide is further oxidized. So write down 2 NO plus O2 again. Again do oxidation. 2 NO plus O2. Then it will get converted to 2 NO2. It will get converted to 2 NO2. 2 NO2, what is it called? Nitrogen dioxide. If NO is nitric oxide, NO2 is called nitrogen dioxide. It is called nitrogen dioxide. N2 gets oxidized, makes nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is further oxidized. It becomes nitrogen dioxide. So nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide, they combine with the moisture present in the atmosphere to become nitrous acid and nitric acid, HNO2 and HNO3. Understood, children? This is nitric oxide. This is nitrogen dioxide. Nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide, they combine with the moisture which is present in the atmosphere and they form nitrous acid and nitric acid. Let us write down that. So we can write it as 2 NO2 plus water molecule. So 2 NO2 plus water molecule, it can either make nitrous acid or it can make nitric acid. So this nitrogen dioxide or nitric oxide, they combine with the moisture present in the atmosphere to make nitrous acid and nitric acid. Shall I write down here? So what are these called? Nitrous acid or nitric acid. Now this nitrous acid and nitric acid, in the form of acid rains, they fall down. Nitrous acid and nitric acid, in the form of acid rains, they fall down. When they are mixing with the acid rains and they are falling down, they become soluble salts of calcium and potassium. They make calcium nitrites, potassium nitrites, and nitrate is the form which will be there fixed up in the soil. So we can write HNO2 or HNO3. HNO3 combines with calcium or potassium salts. HNO3 combines with calcium or K plus salts. Then what happens? When it combines with this, then it makes calcium or potassium nitrates. Now nitrate is a form which will be there in the soil and plant can easily absorb it. So in this manner, the atmospheric N2 is fixed as nitrate. See how many steps are there. We told nitrogen fixation means conversion of N2 to ammonia. Conversion of N2 to ammonia or NO2 or NO3, nitrite or nitrate. See, we are talking about electrical nitrogen fixation which accounts for 10%. Now when it is about to rain, lightning, thunderstorms, electric discharges will be there. They give energy. Using that energy, inert nitrogen gas which is present in the atmosphere gets oxidized to make nitric oxide. Nitric oxide further combines with oxygen to make nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide combines with the moisture present in the atmosphere to make nitrous acid and nitric acid. This nitrous acid, nitric acid will fall as acid rains, and in that process they are mixing with the calcium and potassium salts. Then they make calcium nitrates and potassium nitrates. This calcium nitrate and potassium nitrate will be taken up by the soil, and from the soil plants takes it. Okay children, this is what is about electrical nitrogen fixation. Take a screenshot, then we will talk about industrial nitrogen fixation. Right, now let's go to the second type of nitrogen fixation. What is that second type called? It is called industrial nitrogen fixation. It accounts for 20%. Right, now let's talk about the second type. What is that? Industrial nitrogen fixation. Industrial nitrogen fixation. This process was developed by two scientists called Haber and Bosch. That's why we call it as a Haber-Bosch process. What is the process called? It is called Haber-Bosch process, right? And it accounts for 20% of nitrogen fixation. Now, what should we do here? So, we have to take nitrogen inert gas and combine with the hydrogen. So, nitrogen gas and hydrogen gas, nitrogen cylinder, hydrogen cylinder. So, we will heat it at 450 degrees centigrade at 100 bars of pressure. We will heat it at 450, such a high temperature, and at 100 bars of pressure. When you treat it, so nitrogen gets reduced first to ammonia, then to urea. Nitrogen first gets reduced to ammonia, then to urea. So, in fertilizer companies, this is the process they use to manufacture urea, and that urea farmer will buy and add it to the soil. Right children, what is that process called? Industrial process of nitrogen fixation. How do the industries or factories do? What is the name of the process called? Haber-Bosch process. What do? They convert nitrogenous gas into ammonia and then into urea. How do they do it? At 450 degrees centigrade they do it, and the pressure they maintain is 100 bars pressure. Then urea is made. That urea farmer will spray it on the soil and plants will use it. Right children, we finished about the second process also. Now let's talk about the third process, very important process. What is that? Biological nitrogen fixation. The third and important step is biological nitrogen fixation. Right children? Now, biological nitrogen fixation means where microorganisms are involved, right? So, what can we tell here? Microorganisms help in conversion of N2 to ammonia. Biological nitrogen fixation means where microbes convert atmospheric nitrogen to ammonia, right? So, very few organisms will have an ability to use the atmospheric nitrogen. Very few organisms will have the ability to use atmospheric nitrogen. Plant doesn't have the ability to use atmospheric nitrogen. Then plant depends on prokaryotes, because prokaryotes can take atmospheric nitrogen. So, plant depends on bacteria, cyanobacteria. It depends on prokaryotes to convert that nitrogen into nitrite and ammonia. So, NCERT says that very few organisms have the ability. They have the ability to use atmospheric nitrogen. Very few organisms will have the ability to use atmospheric nitrogen. Only certain prokaryotic bacteria, they are capable of using atmospheric nitrogen. Who can use that nitrogen? Only, not all, that too, few prokaryotic bacteria. Only few prokaryotic bacteria have an ability of nitrogen fixation. Prokaryotic bacteria have ability of nitrogen fixation. They will have ability of nitrogen fixation, right? What do? They convert or they reduce the N2 gas into ammonia. So, prokaryotic bacteria. Prokaryotic bacteria will synthesize an enzyme called nitrogenase. Prokaryotic bacteria, they synthesize an enzyme. What is that enzyme called? Nitrogenase. This nitrogenase enzyme, which is synthesized by the bacteria, has an ability to convert nitrogen into ammonia. It will convert nitrogen into ammonia, and this nitrogenase enzyme, only bacteria can produce it. Only bacteria can produce it. Some bacteria can do nitrogen fixation in free living state. Some bacteria can do nitrogen fixation in symbiotic state. Okay, so let us write on. Some bacteria, they fix nitrogen in free living state, while others fix nitrogen in symbiotic state. Some will fix in the free living state, some can fix only in the symbiotic state. Now we will see the examples of free living prokaryotic bacteria, then we will see the examples of symbiotic bacteria. Understood, children? Let us see what we wrote on the board. In the previous board, we talked about the first process of nitrogen fixation. What is that called? That is electrical nitrogen fixation, accounts for 10%. On the board, we have the second type of nitrogen fixation, which is called industrial nitrogen fixation, accounts for 20%. Happens inside the chemical factories, where they reduce the nitrogen gas into ammonia and urea. Now the third process is called biological nitrogen fixation. This is what we have to study, and who are involved here? Microorganisms are involved here. Every organism will not have the ability to use atmospheric nitrogen. Only prokaryotes will have the ability to fix the nitrogen. How? Why can they fix the nitrogen? Because they have the ability to synthesize an enzyme. What is the name of the enzyme? Nitrogenase enzyme. What will nitrogenase do? It reduces nitrogen to ammonia. Some bacteria can do it in their free living state itself, and some can do it in symbiotic state. Take a screenshot. We will continue. Right? Now, we will list down the bacterial names. Children, we came to the important part now. So, I am going to list down the microorganisms names which you have to remember. So, this is the important part of this topic. They will ask us questions from this. Okay. So, carefully we will list one by one. So, first of all, we will list free living organisms. Then we will go to symbiotic organisms. Right. So, first of all, we list free living bacteria. So, under that, the first category goes with free living aerobic bacteria. The second category will be free living anaerobic bacteria. The third category will be free living cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. Next category will be, all are free living only, right? So we can tell free living, anaerobic, but they are photoheterotrophs. What is that? We will list down. Next will be free living, okay, photoautotrophs, trophic bacteria. So all this we need to see one by one. First we will write the examples of free living aerobic bacteria. So the code is A, B and D. Okay, free living aerobic bacteria, I am going to give a name of a bacteria which starts with A. Then we are going to name a bacteria which starts with B. Then we are going to name a bacteria which starts with D. A is called Azotobacter. Pronounce with me so that you get familiar. A is Azotobacter. Done. Now we'll name the organism which starts with B. Bacterial. What is that called? Bacterial is the second organism. The third organism which starts with D is called Derxia. Pronounce with me. It is called Derxia. So free living aerobic bacteria which can make nitrogenase enzyme examples are Azotobacter, Bacterial, Derxia. Now free living anaerobic bacteria examples, we are going to write B and C. Here the code is ABD. Now here, shall I write down here? ABD. Here the code is BC. Bacillus, Clostridium. What are the examples of free living anaerobic bacteria which can do nitrogen fixation? Examples are B for Bacillus, C for Clostridium. Right, children? Now coming to free living Cyanobacteria, Nostoc and Anabina. The examples are, right, AN. So Anabina is one example. Nostoc is another example. Now coming to free living anaerobic photoheterotrophic bacteria, example is Rhodospirillum. One more example, Rhodopseudomonas. So the examples are, spell with me, Rhodospirillum. Another one is Rhodopseudomonas. Rhodopseudomonas. Right, children? Then coming to free living photoautotrophic bacteria, Chlorobium is an example. Amma, these names you have to remember. All these are in the free living state, they can fix nitrogen. Free living state means, for example, if you want to crack NEET entrance examination, if you are studying by your own, that is something like free living. If you are taking the help of the tutor, then that is symbiotic, right? Understood? Free living means on your own. The bacteria, free living, outside itself, it can do the nitrogen fixation. Now, under that, we have different categories. Aerobic bacteria, which requires oxygen. Anaerobic bacteria, no oxygen. Cyanobacteria means blue-green algae, third category. And next, photoheterotrophs means, heterotrophs means they break the chemicals. Photoautotrophs, they use the sunlight, right? So all examples we listed. Under aerobic, A, B, D examples. Under anaerobic, B, C examples. Under cyanobacteria, A, N examples. Under free living anaerobic photoheterotroph, RR examples. Okay, triple R is coming, but here it is RR. Now free living photoheterotrophs example, Chlorobium. Right, children? All these are examples for free living bacteria. Take a screenshot. Then we will talk about symbiotic bacteria which help in nitrogen fixation. Right? We are doing biological nitrogen fixation, no? In that we are listing out what are the free living bacteria, which have an ability to do nitrogen fixation, and then what are the symbiotic bacteria which have an ability to do nitrogen fixation. Now let us talk about symbiotic bacteria, right? So under that we will take the name of the bacteria, and then we will tell the symbiote, or we can tell like symbiotic, and then we can tell which plant it is associated. We can write the host. We are going to make a table, right? Now under that, our first organism is Rhizobium. This is a popular example, right? Rhizobium. In the root nodules of leguminaceae plants, they help in nitrogen fixation. They enrich the soil, right? So Rhizobium species in which plant? In the leguminaceae plant, where the bacteria will stay in the root nodule. So the symbiotic association is with the root of the plant. So let me write down root nodules, right? And who is the host here? The host here is legume plant, right children? Rhizobium can stay inside the roots of the legume plant, and it fixes atmospheric nitrogen, gives it to the plant. In turn, what plant will give? Shelter, food for the bacteria. Now the second one is again Rhizobium species, some other Rhizobium species, but so some other Rhizobium species also can make root nodules, but not in legume plants, in non-leguminaceae plants. So some Rhizobium bacteria will do nitrogen fixation in leguminaceae plants. Some other Rhizobium bacteria will do nitrogen fixation in non-leguminaceae plants. So here let us write on non-leguminaceae plants. Example, if you want, example is Parasponia is an example, right children? So these two are the examples for bacteria we wrote. Now let us write down Actinomycetes. Example, Actinomycetes member we will see. Under Actinomycetes we have an Actinomycetes member called Frankia. We have an Actinomycetes member. What is it called? It is called Frankia. Frankia will make symbiotic associations with the root nodules. Where can we find them? In the root nodules only of plants like Casuarina, Alnus and Myrica. In the plants like Casuarina, Alnus, Myrica. Children, this point has been asked in NEET 2017 examination. They asked us, Frankia will make symbiotic associations with which plant? And options, either Casuarina will be there, or Alnus will be there, or Myrica will be there. The remaining are the options which are not matching. So we are seeing which bacteria can make symbiotic association. Some Rhizobium make symbiotic association with the Fabaceae members. Some Rhizobium will make symbiotic association in the non-leguminaceae members like Parasponia. An Actinomycetes member, which is also a bacteria, comes under Monera only. So its name is Frankia. It goes and stays inside the root nodules of Casuarina, Alnus, Myrica, and it will do nitrogen fixation. Understood children? Then we will talk about Cyanobacteria now. Let me write down Cyanobacteria. Under Cyanobacteria, Nostoc and Anabaena together. Nostoc and Anabaena together. The symbiotic association is called lichen. The symbiotic association, what's it called? It's called lichen. With lichen means symbiotic associations of algae with fungi. This is algae, right? Blue-green algae. With which fungi? With which fungi? The fungi belonging to either Ascomycetes or Basidiomycetes. So fungus with algae, it makes an association called lichen association. Understood children? Now again we can take the example of Anabaena. Again, we can take the example of Anabina. Now, this Anabina in the leaves of, or yeah, we'll write nostoc first. We'll go in the order bryophyte, pteridophyte, gymnosperm, angiosperm. So, if I have to take bryophyte there, I have to write nostoc here. Right? So, nostoc in the thallus, because bryophyte body is thallus-like, right? Bryophyte body is thallus-like. In bryophytes, nostoc can make symbiotic associations. What is the name of the bryophyte? The name of the bryophyte is Anthocerus. Belongs to hornworts, Anthoceropsida, right? In Anthocerus thallus, nostoc will be there and it helps in nitrogen fixation. Now the third one, now we will take Anabina. We'll take Anabina. Anabina in the leaves of this time pteridophyte. The name of the pteridophyte is Azolla. What is the name of the pteridophyte? The name of the pteridophyte is Azolla. In the Azolla leaves, Anabina will stay and it does nitrogen fixation. Now, again we will go with nostoc. Now this time in the coralloid roots. In the coralloid roots of a gymnosperm. The name of the gymnosperm is Cycas. We have seen the Cycas tree. In the Cycas tree, the upper short roots are called coralloid roots. In those coralloid roots, a cyanobacteria called nostoc will reside and it will take the atmospheric nitrogen, converts into ammonia, gives it to the plant. The last category is again Anabina. The last category is again Anabina. Now this Anabina in the stem glands of this time angiosperm. The name of the angiosperm is Gunnera. The name of the angiosperm is Gunnera. Understood, children? In the previous board, we have listed all the free living bacteria. In this board, we listed all the symbiotic bacteria. 3 types of nitrogen fixations are there. Biological nitrogen fixation, industrial nitrogen fixation, electrical nitrogen fixation. Electrical nitrogen fixation, lightning, thunderstorms will do. What they will do? They'll convert N with O to make NO, NO with O, NO2, NO2 plus water, HNO2, HNO3, HNO3 with potassium and calcium salts. You will get potassium nitrate and calcium nitrate which will fix in the soil. That accounts for how much percent? It accounts for 10% only. 20% is with industrial nitrogen fixation. Haber-Bosch process, 450 degrees centigrade, 100 bars of pressure. Urea is made. We will seal it in the bags. Farmer will buy and he will spray it to the land. Third process, bacteria is doing it. Biological nitrogen fixation. They can synthesize an enzyme called nitrogenase enzyme which can convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. The bacteria can do it in the free living state when they are in the soil also. The bacteria can come into the plant, stay in the plant and can do nitrogen fixation. If the bacteria is staying in the plant, it is symbiotic nitrogen fixation. It is symbiotic nitrogen fixation. If the bacteria is doing in the soil itself, not with the plant association, that is free living. Free living we have seen in the previous board. Free living aerobic we made, free living anaerobic we saw, and free living cyanobacteria we saw, photoheterotrophs we saw, photoautotrophs we saw. We have seen the examples, we made the codes also. ABD code we made, BC code we made, then an AN code we made, RR code we made, and the last one is chlorobium. Now coming to the symbiotic bacteria, we have divided them into bacteria, actinomycetes, cyanobacteria. Under bacteria, rhizobium with the legume plant. This only we will take a reference plant and we will see it in the next class. Some rhizobium in non-leguminous plants like parasponia can do nitrogen fixation. Now, an actinomycetes member called Frankia will do nitrogen fixation in the plants of Casuarina, Alnus and Myrica. They asked this in NEET 2017 examination is very much there in the NCERT book. Now under cyanobacteria, two members only, sometimes nostoc, sometimes anabina. The nostoc and anabina are algae. They make lichen associations with the fungi belonging to the class Ascomycetes and Basidiomycetes. The next one, algae cyanobacteria called nostoc with a bryophyte called Anthocerus. Next one is anabina with a pteridophyte called Azolla. Next one is nostoc with a gymnosperm called Cycus. Next one is anabina with an angiosperm called Gunera. So what we completed is we are checking out with the 3 steps of nitrogen fixation. Hope you understood the content. Any doubts? Post in the comment box. In the next lecture, we'll talk about biological nitrogen fixation step by step. Thank you.